this idea and this concept of polarity or duality of life. It's actually taken me over 5 years of sitting with this concept to kind of have an understanding of it the way that I do today. And so one of the main takeaways of it is, from a scientific standpoint, is we really interact with the world, we through our five senses, right? You've got, hearing, vision, smelling, taste and touch, right? And so what you may not know is that all of these senses and all these things that you kind of interact in the physical world, all these things come at you in waves. So when you see a specific color, that's actually a vibration of light coming at you with a specific wave, right? If you hear a sound, even if it's just one note on a piano or a singing bowl, that's really just the sound coming at you with a specific wave function as well too. And so, a wave has two aspects to it. It has an off or an on, or you can think of it as a peak or a trough, or as you get more than naturalist, has a mountainous aspect to it and a valley aspect to it. And when you really get to the more spiritual lens, when we get to it, has this kind of alignment or flow aspect on the top end, and this yugen or deep, dark, mysterious, connecting with the wisdom on the lower end. And so that's kind of one of the keys of the whole thing. So the main takeaway of this is that these always are true. So every aspect always comes in and always has these two things in it. So these two aspects can never be separated. They kind of always come together. That's what people kind of falsely think about with the social media aspect. You can kind of cut off all the bad stuff, only show the good stuff, but it's not true, because just like the sound or the pitch of a sound that you hear comes at you with both the peak and the trough, mountain valley aspect of it, everything in life does that as well. At the time of recording this, we're in the middle of the global pandemic, 2020, and so I would say there's never been a more consistent time where everybody's in a valley period, in somewhat trough in some way or another. There's always been kind of booms and busts in various economies, different regions of the world and so forth, or different health outbreaks in various areas. But I would say not since maybe major world wars or the previous 1918 pandemic has everybody been in the same boat together. So everybody's being affected slightly differently, but no matter where you are in the world, there's some people who've been sick, some people who know people who've been sick. There are people who've just been affected by the economics, the economy, where jobs and restaurants and all that kind of stuff, and travel areas that rely on travel have all been affected, right? So I don't think I need to belabor this point, but we are now in probably a valley trough area for most everybody, whether someone who's been affected, you've been affected, sick through your health, affected economically, or just affected by your freedoms, what you can do, who you can and can't see, your ability to travel. In some way, everybody's been affected, right? So when you look at that and say, oh, well, two things are always connected, this peak and this trough, this mountain, this valley, they're always connected. So what it actually means is that even though we're in this trough, it's going to be connected to some peak. You may say, oh, it's the peak before us, but in reality, it's probably the next peak. So I think there are lots of people who would say, would you want to go back to 2019 or the period of time before this when things were quote unquote normal? And a lot of people would say, oh, absolutely, because everything that we're going through. But in reality, I think one of the good things that's come out of this is, I think, while we're in it and we're all in it together, you're seeing some beautiful aspects of it. Say that it's only this valley, it's only these terrible things, would not be true. Examples would be, at 7 o'clock and shift changes in New York City, where the frontline healthcare workers were on shift change, and you have people in New York City kind of clapping, cheering, and cheering them on. I think that's a beautiful human moment to recognize people who are at the front lines of this pandemic. I think equally, even though everyone's kind of sequestered in Italy, and you saw some videos of people who are stuck inside, they can't go out, they can't see anyone, but they're singing to each other, down around the streets and so forth. So everyone's kind of having these sing-alongs, trying to get that human connection in some way, while they can't do it to the same degree they did before. These are kind of beautiful moments or connections that we wouldn't have had if we didn't have this pandemic. I'm not saying it's necessarily worth it to have a pandemic for these, but this is an aspect that comes with it. In the same way, I would hope that as we come out of that, from hearing from lots of people, that people are getting more spiritual, or kind of kind of going within themselves, kind of kind of a rebirth time. So hopefully, when we come out of this pandemic, we don't say, "Oh, we just want to go back to the way things were." We say, "Yes, we'd like the people's health and the economies to kind of get strengthened, but maybe there are things that we would want to change. There are things that we're not going to allow to go back to the way we were, whether it's specific consumption habits, or taking things for granted that we realize we were taking for granted during this period of time, or really kind of kind of doing the inward search and kind of focusing on what might be really important to you during this time, and hopefully everyone kind of reshuffles their priorities, come out of this. So while we're in a super deep trough where everybody's being affected to some degree, the if you just the wrong way to approach it, in my view, is to say, "Oh, let's just go back to the way things were, pretend this never happened, we're on pause." The right way, which is kind of what this is the secret of life is kind of teaching you of, is if you sit in this trough and you kind of sit in the valley and you kind of gain the wisdom of what you can get from it, you kind of set up the next peak to be even higher or better, whatever the case may be, because you've taken this wisdom from this low point, kind of taking the time to focus on what's really important, and hopefully you can take that to the next peak mountaintop, so that you don't have we don't go back to the way things were exactly before. So instead, we'll go through, as I mentioned, we'll have other videos. Please watch them, please connect to them, where we kind of attack this from many different angles, so you'll kind of see it. There's no way you can absorb all of it within the first video. But I'd say, before we kind of pass it off to some kind of wise words around this as well, but it's this main concept is the secret of life is that everything comes at you in waves. It's this polarity, this kind of duality, and this idea that they're always connected. So they always come together. So trying to chop one off to save the other makes absolutely no sense. It's kind of like a magnet, right? A magnet always has a north and a south pole. You cut the magnet in half, and you're trying to chop off the bad end, whatever you think that is, and you end up with exactly the same thing. Same magnet with a north and a south pole. You end up with two magnets with north and south poles. So you really can't cut them off because they're that connected. So it's not just everyone kind of feels that you have this ups and downs, and that's going to happen with life, but it's the fact that they're actually intrinsically connected to each other, and so you have to absorb them, take them in as both, and then learn what you can from both of them.
It's like the crest and the trough of a wave. You can't have a wave that is all trough and no crest, just as you can't have a wave which is all crest and no trough. Such a thing has never been manifested in the physical universe. They go together. And that is the secret.